Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are entering into the combat zone. I'm Joe, he's Nick, and this is the place where the enemy can only say one of four things. Abandon ship, bail out, take cover, and we surrender. Did I get it? I don't know if I even got it in the right order this time. Come on, Nick, criticize me. I don't know what to...
That's not bad.
That's not bad?
You need a little more fire in your belly when you do it.
For the enemy only has four things to say. Abandon ship, bail out, take cover, and we surrender.
Yeah, I'm not into that voice theatric stuff, though, Nick.
You're in the media. You have to have a little flair to you.
Flair.
You don't want
Ric Flair stuff.
You don't want us to call. You don't want to start calling you Andy the Marshmallow Man, do you?
Is that a real character from something?
Well, I was thinking more of along the lines of Andrew Scheer.
Oh, I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole.
Well, I call him the Marshmallow Man because he looks like one.
Andrew's an okay guy.
I didn't say he wasn't. I just said he was. He look. Does he not look like a Marshmallow Man? Tell me I'm wrong.
Nick, speaking for myself, I mean, I'm not saying that you look like a Marshmallow Man, Nick, but I have, and I know you're making fun of Andrew's dimples.
Right.
Yeah, I get that.
Yep.
I don't have, well, I do have a dimple, actually, but you can't see it because it's hidden by my beard.
Well, I wasn't going to get any more personal than that, but anyway.
Okay, so off to a fast start tonight, aren't we?
No, not really.
Okay, the number to call, area code 4. Let's start that again. Toll free anywhere in North America. Number to call 844-415-2115. Was that dramatic enough for you, Nick?
That was amazing. As a matter of fact, don't make me laugh when I'm trying to take a sip of tea.
I know. Well, you get it all over your computer. Have you fixed your computer?
I do. I've got a brand new screen in it. It's amazing.
What did you do? You brought it in somewhere to get it fixed, the screen? Or?
Yes. And the short answer is yes. My son-in-law does a lot of this stuff. I went weeping like a baby to him, and he patted me on the head and said, "Don't worry, we'll get it fixed for you." And a week later, here it is.
Perfect.
Yep.
Well, that's very nice.
Yes. Now, today was a great day. It was sunny. It was warm. It was beautiful. And I noticed the sun had a bit of a blue tinge to it today. Did you notice that?
I know where you're going with this.
The sky was a little bit deeper blue than normal. And I just couldn't help but smile. And I realized that the effect was the glow coming from the west. Because the UCP,
the United Conservative Party
that's
of
the
Alberta,
one, under Jason Kenney, now rules the day in Alberta with a majority government.
Right. I think, how many seats did they finally end up with?
63.
Because I think there's still a handful of seats that might be affected, primarily in Calgary, with the counting of ballots, because you could have voted in advance polls anywhere. You didn't have to go to a particular advance poll in your city. Somebody told me actually yesterday that they even had an advance poll set up at the airport in Calgary. So if you were getting on your plane or getting off your plane, you could just go and vote.
Boy,
and what you would do is you'd provide them with your address. And I don't know if that was in a special card you had to present or whatever, but somehow or other they were able to catch your address, and then that vote would be assigned to the riding that you live in. Mm-hmm. But my understanding is that there are probably a couple of 100,000 of those votes still to be counted. So that's going to possibly have an impact on a handful of ridings still, but it won't have an impact on the result overall, and that is a resounding defeat for Notley and Premier Notley and her NDP government, and the election of a nominally, at any rate, Conservative government under Jason Kenney. So we're going to have to see how that's going to go. You know the old saying, I use it often, Nick, right? Be careful with what you wish for, you might get it. So, Jason is now the premier of, Jason Kenney is now the premier of Alberta. And he has a tremendously difficult task ahead of him. Because it's easy, I got to say this, okay, and I'm not defending the NDP here. I think that they were a disastrous government in Alberta, and I think that the Conservatives, the United Conservative Party under Jason Kenney, is going to do many, many good things for the province of Alberta. But
I knew there was a but coming.
Of course, there's always a but coming for me because you know me, I should be growing horns because I'm always the devil's advocate, right? So what I would say to all of this is, Nick, that to a degree, Rachel Notley was a victim of circumstances that were, to a large degree, I think, outside of her control. And some of the problems that she was having to face that were causing difficulties for the Alberta economy, they were caused by her government, caused by the Liberal government in Ottawa, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about that moving forward, but also caused by different governments, different provincial governments, different environmental groups. So there were a lot of problems that Kenny's going to have to work on sorting out. Not all of them are going to be very easy, and a lot of them are still going to be very complicated. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes.
Well, the one thing that I will say about Rachel Notley is that she was a victim of her friends. Like, her government attracted a lot of the most far left wingnuts from an environmental point of view that you can think of. And then Trudeau's hypocrisy. I mean, Rex Murphy, I didn't have a chance to read the column, but in it, he apparently makes the point that Trudeau's hypocrisy on environment didn't help her either. And she came too late to the party to support, building the pipelines. She started talking about that in the dying days of her government. But by then, the damage had been done. I mean, it was way too late. I'm curious, though, and I'll tell you what, I have some worries about Jason Kenney. Anytime somebody makes as many promises as he has, like his document is, 100 pages long and 300 promises or something along that line?
Yeah, I didn't read the manifesto or the platform, whatever they call it here in Canada. I didn't read it. I haven't seen it. But I heard yesterday that it was in excess of 100 pages. That's a long document.
That's right. Now, the problem comes is people are going to read it, especially his friends. And they're going to look in it and say, okay, what did he promise me? And you know the old saying, if you try to please everybody, you won't please anybody. So what he's done is he's laid the table in a way that he's going to disappoint his supporters at some point, whether he wants to or not. This is why less is sometimes more. When you have that many promises out there, invariably it's easy to make on the campaign trail, but once you take over government and you start actually having to implement some of this stuff, you realize that either you can't do it at all because of things you didn't know about, or the implementation of it is going to cause such pain that you don't want to do it. So and I'm not saying that for everything in it. I'm sure there's lots of good things he's going to do, like get the pipeline started, things like that, get people back to work. But I would have preferred if he'd have come out and made 3 or 4 major points and just stuck to that, and then trimmed his acceptance speech down to about 10 minutes from 30.
Yeah, it was a little. I don't know if it was 30 minutes, but it was long and it was repetitive to the to the point. Look, when you're giving a speech, especially a victory speech to the the choir, as it were, because
right.
That's the group that he was talking to last night, were UCP supporters in the convention hall where they held their reception. So it's of course he's going to throw the sort of the platitudes and the cliches out there, and throw the red meat down and see how many people dive for it and start eating it raw type of thing. Good for him. It's great rhetoric. Gets the troops motivated. They're all happy. But after you're doing it for 10 or 15 minutes, it gets to be a little repetitive, and all of a sudden, the cliches and the platitudes that you've been using that sound good start to sound a little contrived. So I did notice that, and I know you and I were watching the returns last night together.
Right.
So we talked about it a little bit last night, but other people talked about it as well last night that were around, and it's funny. I heard from people today that I was talking to on the phone from other places in Canada who made similar comments. And another interesting comment that came up from more than a few people that I talked to was the fact that he had, as the newly elected premier of Alberta, okay, I mean the premier-elect, because obviously he's not the premier until he's sworn in.
Right.
But as the incoming premier for Alberta, giving a victory speech, having just won a resounding majority mandate from the voters in Alberta, for whatever reason decided to, spend 4 or 5 minutes of his speech speaking French. And that surprised a lot of people too. I understood that he wanted to speak directly to the people in Quebec. I don't know if you had a chance to read Premier Legault's responses.
No.
He was very gracious in slamming the door in Premier-elect Kenny's face.
Yeah, well.
It was, and he more or less thanked. I don't think he used those exact words, but he more or less thanked Kenny for speaking to the people of Quebec, taking the time to speak to them in French. I think the word he used was gracious or classy or something along those lines. And then he explained, very quickly after that, no. As for everything that you want to deal with us on, no. We're not going to work with you on climate change. We're not going to work with you on pipelines. We're not going to work with you on equalization. And so there it is. A little risky on Kenny's part to sort of launch into, bring all of those subjects up in the manner he did without some kind of early groundwork to make sure that, the Premier of Quebec isn't going to call a press conference and, as I said, very politely, very graciously slam the door in your face.
Yeah, that's true. I would have, if I was in Jason Kenney's shoes, my acceptance speech would have been far shorter. It would have sounded something like, hey, guys, we won. Tomorrow we get to work. Tonight, let's enjoy it. Thank you, Rachel Notley, for your service. Let's get out of here and go grab a beer or something along that line. You just won. It's like winning the Stanley Cup. And by the way, I've been watching the Stanley Cup playoffs, and the hockey this year is, every year in the last 5 or 10 years, the level of skill is just unbelievable. And there's something, I want to get into something on that a little bit later.
We'll get into some of that stuff a little later.
Yeah, I'm not going to get there.
Let's just, the thing, I think the real problem, that with Jason is going to be that he's so focused on the economic stuff, okay, that he's not wrong in doing that, but a lot of the factors, a lot of the variables that have gone into causing the problems that exist in Alberta right now are not entirely under the control of the Alberta government. So it's very easy for him to say, build that pipe, They were saying, build that pipe, build that pipe. And he interrupted them. Remember last night?
Build those pipes.
Said, no, it's more than one. It's build those pipes, okay? Well, I don't know how he gets that done. So that's an awfully big promise to make that he cannot possibly deliver on without the cooperation of other provinces, other premiers, the federal government, environmental groups, various agencies, etc. That's an awfully tough mountain to climb. So to make that sort of, the centerpiece of what you're doing, and Alberta is not a very highly taxed jurisdiction either. So, what are you going to do? You're not going to cut taxes so much. So you cut spending, but they have a deficit and they have a debt, and I'm sure he'll work hard to get that under control. But I don't know ultimately what all of that accomplishes. Interestingly enough, as a conservative, or nominally as a conservative, one of the things that, or a few of the things that he could deal with right away, once his government is sworn in, that really does fall under the exclusive control of the government of Alberta, are some of the social policy things.
Right.
And the one thing that comes to mind immediately are the compulsory in Alberta gay-straight alliance clubs.
Yep.
That are not just compulsory in public schools, but are compulsory in private schools and private religious schools as well. Now, he can immediately eliminate that. Make them, keep them if you want, make them voluntary, okay? And a number of related policy areas that he could adjust that I think would be very beneficial to Alberta society.
There is one issue I know of that was in the early days of the Notley regime, where they tried to unionize farm labor, and they were taking away the right. Like if you employed your children on your farm, they would consider that child labor. Did they ever follow through on that?
What you're saying rings a bell. I do remember that there was talk of doing that. I don't recall that it was specifically Alberta, but I take your word for it.
Yeah, it was in Alberta because it was under Notley.
I don't know if it actually passed, and if it did, I don't know. Well, if it did, it would still be in place, and that would be something that obviously
that's why
the
I brought it
government
up.
could. So it's really interesting that what my sense of the campaign is that the Conservatives under Jason Kenney spent a lot of time talking about and promising results on those things over which they have limited amount of control and ability to influence. On those other conservative issues, again, to a large degree social conservative issues, that I think have a wide support. I don't think that most Albertans believe that gay-straight alliances should be compulsory, especially in private schools. So I don't see how you lose a lot of votes by taking a stand on those issues. But they didn't talk about any of them. And so I find it very odd. I find it very odd that you've put all of your eggs into the economic sort of energy renewing or rejuvenating the energy sector basket, which is, I think, critical. Obviously, it's critically important to the economy of Alberta, and I think it's critically important to the long-term economic health of Canada. But again, as I said, you're making big promises that I don't know that you're going to be able to keep. But look, let's give the man a benefit of the doubt. I know Jason Kenney. He's a hardworking public servant. He's intelligent, and I've often wondered what he'd do once he had the ability to control the levers of power, whether it was provincially and federally. So now we're going to see.
Well, you're right. Like I'm not dumping on the guy. I certainly would prefer a Jason Kenney government than a Rachel Notley one. I think that's beneficial to not only Alberta but to the country as a whole. What I'm curious about now, because put yourself in Justin Trudeau's shoes. There's a map I brought up here, if I can just find it. It shows you what the country looked like at 2015, how many provinces were liberal or liberal-dominated. And I know if I just keep going through this list, I'll find it, or I won't. Anyway, it shows that most of the country was either red or orange.
Right.
In 2015.
Right.
Now, the only places that are red are in the Maritimes, PEI, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland. And the only other jurisdiction that is not blue is BC.
Right.
You got Ontario, Manitoba, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Quebec, New Brunswick.
Yeah, New Brunswick is going to go. I think New Brunswick. Somebody was telling me yesterday that New Brunswick, they're going to have an election soon, and they'll probably go. Hard to believe, but they'll probably go green.
Yeah, I heard that too. I don't know. I hope not.
I don't know. But here's the thing: I know where you're going with this, Nick, and I understand. And you're looking at the shifting color, and for those of you who are our listeners in the United States of America, when we talk about blue in Canada, blue is conservative, red is liberal. It's the opposite of what it is down.
That's right.
Down in
blue
in
is
your
good,
country,
red is bad.
States. So here, we prefer a blue country. You down with you guys, you probably prefer a red country. And so you're right that the liberal governments are losing elections at the provincial level. They're not losing, and they're not liberal governments, at least not nominally so, not capital L liberal governments, but at the municipal level, generally, the Liberals and the New Democrats, which would be our socialists here in Canada, for those who don't know, generally tend to do fairly well. But here's the thing about the pattern that I think you're trying to establish, Nick. It's not traditionally the way it works in Canada. Traditionally, the way it works in Canada is that if the provinces are blue, the federal government tends to be red.
Right.
And vice versa, especially in the case of Ontario.
Right.
Is that if the Ontario government is a conservative government, then typically, historically, the federal government has been liberal. Now, let me make clear, I don't buy into the theory that voters make a conscious decision when they go into the voting booth to vote Liberal if their provincial government in Ontario is conservative, and vice versa. But it is a curiosity that you cannot deny that has been the trend, even if it's not the way people consciously vote or the reason why they vote that way. So, this is again one of those situations where you have to be careful what you wish for. And you might actually get it. You get rid of the Liberals right across the country at the provincial government level, and then before you know it, people are voting Liberal at the federal level because they want some sort of balance, I suppose. I don't know.
Well, I think that this is a problem, and the reason I brought that up, you're right, is this idea of balance. But at the same time, it's also the trend. And this has brought on, I think, a lion's share of this problem. I won't lay it all at his feet, but is because of the incompetence and the complete disconnection of the Prime Minister from the average voting person. We've seen him in some of the most arrogant town hall comments in town halls. Like he got a little flustered in a town hall. It was nothing like, "Thank you for your donation. We appreciate your support," which was about a month ago at the Laurier Club, when an Aboriginal woman got up and said, "I just want clean water," or something like that. Called him out on a promise he'd made, and he responded with this incredibly So these kind of events are beginning to pile up. And now the Aga Khan story is coming back. We can get into that now, or we can save it for later. But a judge has ordered the Attorney General, or I'd have to pull the story up. But
I think it's the Ethics Commissioner.
Ethics Commissioner, that's it. To reconsider her former the guy who had the job before she did, decision not to investigate. He said, maybe you should reconsider that, which is about as close to saying go reconsider it as you can get without actually saying it.
Yeah, I obviously I'm not in favor of judges ordering officers of Parliament to investigate members of Parliament. I'm a very big believer in parliamentary independence. And ironically, Conservatives are going to, Robert's going to send me an email telling me how much of a liberal I am, or a shill for the Liberal Party, or what have you. But, I can't help but point out the irony that Conservatives are going to point to this court ruling and go, you see, you have to do what you're told. At the same time that they're saying that the Attorney General has to be, and I know it's a different officer and different positions, etc., but I think that the principle remains the same. I do believe in parliamentary supremacy and the independence of Parliament, and I don't think that judges should be ordering. Well, be that as it may, it could spell another little bit of trouble. It's the old Chinese water torture.
Exactly,
right?
And that's the point I'm making.
Drip, drip, drip. That could be the case.
No matter how big the bucket, sooner or later, enough drops will fill it.
But you said something, Nick. I think I think it's really important to just sort of hit the pause button and ask yourself whether or not truly Justin Trudeau is that out of touch with people in this country, with voters in this country. It's easy to draw that conclusion, but that is a conclusion that I would be very interested in testing through some real polling. I don't mean superficial polling. He may not be in touch with the majority of people in this country, but don't use you and don't use me as your example of the normal person in this country, because as hardcore conservatives, okay, fiscal conservatives, social conservatives, borderline libertarians when it comes to the size and scope and power of government, we're not the normal voter. Okay, we're not the normal
that's true.
Canadian.
That's true.
And remember that politics is not about getting the majority of people to support you. Politics today, like practical politicking, is about finding the people that more or less agree with you already, getting them excited, mobilizing them, getting them out to the polls. And so from Justin Trudeau's point of view, it makes sense that he's going to talk about all of these things like, climate change, and he might still start talking about feminism, but clearly his reputation in that area has taken
such a hit.
Justifiably or not, he certainly has taken a hit there. But there are, the pipeline thing, environmental, the state of the environment, climate change, global warming, carbon taxes. People keep on saying carbon taxes are going to be so unpopular, and yeah, but will they be so unpopular to enough people that it's going to make a difference in the voting booth come October? I don't know. I'm always cautious about getting this tunnel vision and think, okay, gosh, Justin Trudeau is out of touch with the country. He may be, but I have yet to see the evidence of that, to be perfectly honest with you. His polls have hurt, no question. But we'll wait and see, what happens in October.
Well, we're over 4.5 months away, and that's a lifetime in politics.
It is. That's a good point.
And look, I'm as cognizant of that fact as you are, as much as I am loath to admit it, because I want the whole country to see the thing the way that I do. Well, of course, in a democracy, that never happens. You never have consensus on anything. Like, if you had a room full of 100 people and you asked them their opinion of the weather, you'll get 100 different opinions. And that's just on the weather. Imagine politics. So you have, everybody has their own little way of looking at things, and some people find certain things more important than others.
Correct.
And they will hold on to those, and no matter where the political winds blow. So it's really hard to predict what the public mood is going to be 2 weeks out from the election when you're 4 months away. All that to be said, the story about the Aga Khan and the story about the Norman case, the Vice Admiral Norman, which is they still can't get any documentation from the PMO or the Chief Privy Council or whatever the guy that office is. They've been petitioning for it. They have a right to it, and it just hasn't been forthcoming. All this stuff is beginning to snowball. And snowball, I think we've got a mountain of it. And people, while maybe it's right now it's not, what you're doing is you're putting ammunition in your enemy's rifle. And the conservatives can run ads of all different kinds over the next 3 or 4 months to help perpetuate. Now, the conservatives didn't have anything to do with this Aga Khan story. They didn't launch it. They didn't leak it. They didn't do anything. This is something that's come out of the legal system. So for that, you can't blame them. However, who knows where we'll be, 2 weeks out from an election in, say, going into the 1st of November or 1st of October. But boy, I'll tell you, if things keep going the way they're going, it won't be as hard to predict.
Okay, we're going to go for a break. We'll be back in 3 or 4 minutes. So get up, stretch your legs, and we'll see you on the other side.
Okay, welcome back to the Combat Zone, folks. For those of you who don't know, Boston just tied the series between Toronto and Boston 6-4. Scored an empty net goal. Toronto
Ice hockey.
Sorry?
Ice hockey.
It's hockey.
Ice hockey.
No, you don't need to say ice.
Well, you do if you're speaking to our listeners in Great Britain.
Well, how many other forms of hockey are there worth watching?
Field hockey.
Yeah, but they're not playing field hockey right now.
Who's not playing?
All right, for those of you in England, hockey is primarily played on a sheet of ice with skates. And we're in the Stanley Cup playoffs. This is the most difficult trophy in the sporting world to win.
Okay. We were going to spend this half hour talking about Canada's real environmental crisis.
All right,
but no. Let's push that off to the top of the hour, to the next segment.
All right.
Let's talk about hockey.
All right.
Okay? Violence in hockey.
All right.
I know, because you had a few things you wanted to say about this.
I did. So let me just finish. In the world of sports, in all the world of sports, this is the most difficult trophy to win. It's also other than the Canadian Football League Grey Cup, it's the oldest continuously contested trophy in the world of sports. And it takes the most skilled athletes on the planet to play this game at this level. So when you watch a hockey game in the Stanley Cup playoffs, you're seeing the finest athletes in the world competing for the most coveted trophy in the world and in their sport. Now, and all apologies to the World Cup for soccer and all that other stuff. That's all I'm not putting them down. But anyway, hockey is it. So the one thing about hockey is it carries with it a certain element, and that is that there is a long history of hockey players dropping their gloves and settling their differences man-to-man on the ice. They actually get into fistfights. And the penalty for it is a 5-minute major penalty where you go off and sit in the penalty box, or as we call it, the sin bin, for up to 5 minutes unless the other team scores. So you put your team down by a man. So instead of having 5 skaters aside, your team is now only 4 skaters.
Right, except with a major penalty.
Oh, that's right.
If the other team scores, you still sit out the penalty.
You have to sit it out the whole 5 minutes.
So for a 2-minute penalty, which would be a minor penalty,
then
the penalty is eliminated once the other team scores, if they score.
Right. So you can score 4 goals in a 5-minute fighting for a 5-minute fighting major, and you still have to sit there.
Correct.
Anyway, but it's a time-honored tradition that in Canada or in the hockey world, when 2 guys square off, the refs back off, and these guys go at it toe-to-toe until one guy goes down. And then the fight ends. There's none of this thumping away on a guy when he's down. So a couple of nights ago, one of the premier hockey players in the league, a guy called Alexander Ovechkin, he's a Russian, fought another Russian, a brand new guy whose name I can't remember and couldn't say it even if I could remember it, Stoviansky or something like that, was 19 years old, and they've been kind of sparring back and forth all night. And finally, the kid looked at Ovechkin and said, and Ovechkin said, "You want to go?" And the kid said, "Yeah, I want to go." So they dropped their gloves, and the fight lasted a whole 10 seconds. The kid threw a couple of haymakers at Ovechkin, and Ovechkin clocked him on the chin and dropped him like a sack of potatoes. He was out cold. Now, to give you some idea, Ovechkin is 235 and 6'3". This kid was 6 foot and 195 pounds. So there's about a 40-pound difference, and Ovechkin might be in his late 30s, but he's a wall of muscle. These hockey players are not small people. So the whole thing was that he should have known better. He should have skated away. Look, when you're playing in this league, if you challenge somebody like that, then they're going to take you up on it. But the question becomes, does fighting have a place in hockey? Now, everybody gets upset about this, but I want to contrast this to what goes on in, those cage matches you see in MMA, mixed martial arts, where these guys wearing these half boxing gloves, and the big baggy silk shorts go in there and kick the living daylight. There's blood everywhere. And they don't stop when the other guy goes down. They just hammer away. And what bothers me is you worry about a guy like Ovechkin, who as soon as that kid is out, he's done the fight. He stops because he's not really out to hurt anybody. The kid challenged him. He said, okay. They bang, bang, bang. Fight's over. Lets him go. The kid will learn his lesson, and he won't do that again. How is that so bad that we have to start talking about banning fighting in hockey, but at the same time, over in other sports, like look at boxing, look at MMA, as I mentioned. I won't even talk about wrestling. That's such a fantasy world. It's not even worth talking about. But there's all kinds of our sports out there where bloodletting seems to be the main purpose. And we have a problem with professional hockey players who are fit as, they're the incredibly conditioned, highly trained athletes, have taken a few pokes at each other. Am I the only one that thinks there's something out of kilter here?
No.
I didn't think so.
Look, first of all, I think that if you're looking for a difference between hockey and MME or boxing or wrestling or any other type of martial art where you're actually hitting people, I mean, the fighting is the sport. And I'm not an MME fan, to be perfectly honest. I don't think I've ever seen a single mixed martial arts as MMA or MME.
Mixed martial arts.
What does the E stand for?
Now you're asking me tough questions.
I hate to have, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Nick, but I don't think I've seen a single one. I watch the odd boxing match from time to time.
It is
and
A,
the
by
thing
the way,
about
not
with
E.
it is MMA?
Yeah.
MMA, okay, that makes sense. Mixed martial arts. So I see the odd boxing match from time to time, and it's very heavily regulated. Obviously, you're wearing boxing gloves, so the damage that you can do in hitting people is limited, but it's a violent sport. But it's tightly controlled, tightly regulated, and MMA is a different case. It's
wait a minute.
There's a lot of it.
Let's go back.
The point is that these are the fight is the sport. Now, with hockey, okay, I don't hear anybody saying that fighting is part of hockey, the sport. I hear people saying fighting is part of the game because somehow or other these elite athletes, okay, have to be able to take out their frustrations on one another, and they have to be able to, pardon me, they have to be able to enforce some kind of code of conduct between one another. It's the only sport in the world, including the only full contact sport. And by the way, if you have to take out your frustrations, you're playing hockey, and you have the energy to take out your frustrations. Okay, I don't know how much energy you're actually putting into those 1 minute and a half shifts where you're going allegedly supposed to be going all out. I'm hesitating because I'm a little closer to being of two minds on this than what I'm going to say. But if I have to come down on one side or the other, I'd come down on the side of saying, fighting should be banned from hockey.
Okay, here's
I think it takes away from the sport. But now, I understand that it's people do it, and so you can make the argument that it's culturally part of the sport. Not okay, I suppose.
But that's not why most guys fight. It's not about frustration. If you have a guy like Ovechkin, okay, he's in his late 30s, probably in his last season or two. All of a sudden, some 19-year-old nobody kid comes out of nowhere, knee on knee, and takes him out. Okay, now you've taken out an elite player who is the whole franchise is built around. Okay, or say it's Sidney Crosby or Austin Matthews. Who cares about the age? The fact is, these people they have franchises built around them.
Right.
And some goon comes along, some kid trying to make a name for himself, wipes out that career or extremely damages it by a knee-on-knee or a dirty hit or something like that, the reason why a lot of people say there needs to be fighting is so that the kid has to face the fact that if he tries something like that, the corresponding guy on the other side of the line, the big defenseman or the 6'3", the protector of that athlete is going to come over the boards, and the first chance he's going to get, the gloves go down, your head comes off. It's a way of protecting that superstar from being manhandled to the point where you ruin them.
And my answer to that is that if there's such a thing, okay, so my background. I played rugby, not rugby league, but rugby union, okay, which is in many respects it's a very violent sport, and no protection. It's tackle football on steroids. There's almost no substitute. There's very little substitution. You play offense, you play defense, 2 40-minute halves. It's a brutal sport, and it's a violent sport, and there's no fighting. You throw a slap, you throw a punch, you're out of the game. Period. Full stop. How do you enforce proper conduct and ensure that there is no dangerous play, like in hockey, a knee-on-knee check or anything like that? Well, the rules say that you can't tackle in certain ways because it's dangerous. And if anyone does it, they're out of the game. Period. Full stop. And if they do it repeatedly, they're out of the league. There's zero tolerance for this kind of stuff. And so what I'm saying, Nick, is that while I appreciate the need for enforcement of the rules to ensure that nobody is purposely engaging in dangerous play for the sake of injuring other players, I think that there are other ways to enforce those rules. And I think that, when you ask, it's kind of like the question of should you ban fighting in reverse, okay, or coming at it from the other angle. So instead of talking about fighting, ask yourself this question: why are knee-on-knee checks tolerated?
Well, that is.
I mean, they're not tolerated.
Right.
You'll get a penalty.
Right.
If it's really egregious, you might be kicked out of the game. And you might face a 1 or 2 or 3 game suspension. Well, worst case scenario, you'll face 5 or 6 games.
That's what Toronto Maple Leafs player Nazem Kadri is doing right now.
Okay, so my question is, if a guy engages in that kind of play where it's clear that he's trying to injure, and by the way, the rules in rugby are it doesn't matter whether you're trying to injure or not. Okay, you tackle a person the wrong way against the rules, okay, you're out. It doesn't matter whether you did it accidentally or not. You have a responsibility to look out for the safety of your opponent. And that's drilled into the consciousness of the player. So that's part of the culture of the game. And I fear that, the real reason why there's so much resistance to banning fighting in hockey isn't because if you take fighting out, then you don't have any tools to enforce the rules. It's because it's part of the culture of the game. And there's very few people that I hear that actually just say that straight out. Like, that's just the reality. Fighting is part of hockey. Well, fans go to the hockey game and they would like to see a fight.
There is a certain NASCAR mentality to it. I won't argue with that. However, this is something that this sport is also steeped in history and tradition, unlike the way a lot of other sports are. Generally, because let's face it, in the 1970s, we all remember the Broad Street Bullies, the team from Philadelphia. They're called the Philadelphia Flyers. I mean, there were times they were scraping blood off the ice with the snow shovels. I mean, it was just bench clearing brawls. Now they've come a long way from those days. Those days are gone. You don't see that anymore. I can't remember the last time I saw a bench clearing brawl. I mean, you have.
Well, I've seen some doozies.
Yes, I have too. Like when Boston Bruins were chasing fans up into the stands, still dressed in their uniforms, because the fans did something.
Yeah, that I saw a few. That was back in the 70s.
That's what I'm talking about.
That was back in the.
Since then, it
Tony
has been
Esposito and Bobby Orr days. I don't think they ever chased anyone, but
he was too busy on the ice.
What's his name? What was O'Reilly's first name? I can't remember his.
Bill. No, not Bill. I'm thinking of the talk show host.
Yeah. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Grapes would know. Anyway, so I really am. Guys, I agree with you in a lot of ways that this sport. They call soccer the beautiful sport. I call it the boring sport. It's just dull to watch by comparison. And that hockey to me is the greatest sport on earth because it has everything about it. It has speed, it has grace, it has power. It's like a moving, rolling chessboard that you don't stop to rearrange the pieces. The pieces are in constant motion. Okay? So there's so many great qualities about it. Fighting, it interrupts that. It breaks up the rhythm. Now, a lot of people say yes, but it can inspire the teams to play better. Well, maybe. I'm not denying that, but there's other ways to do that, too, like score a shorthanded goal and watch your team come off the bench.
Okay, but it sounds like you're agreeing with me.
Well, see, I was just going to say I'm of two minds of it.
So you're like me. You're of two minds.
Yeah. I as much, because I don't mind if two grown adults want to go toe-to-toe in front of 20,000 people and hammer away at each other. I'm not overly offended by that. But on the other hand, we know enough now, and this was my point about boxing, was we know enough now about head injuries and concussions that even with those big fat gloves on, you can really hurt somebody in the boxing ring. I know you're right. It's very heavily regulated and all that stuff, but you are physically trying to knock a man unconscious or at least knock him down because he can't stand. And that is, look at what happened to Muhammad Ali. Compare him now, today, to what he was like 30, 40 years ago.
But look at, he's dead, so.
Well, okay, fine. I didn't realize he'd passed away.
But John Kordick, hockey player John Kordick, right? He was an enforcer.
Yep.
There's a lot of these guys that have suffered serious injuries, and I'll tell you what, a bare-knuckled fight on the ice, okay, there's very rarely do they, you see them throwing a lot of punches, and some of them land, but they're wearing so much equipment, and they've got holding on to one another so tightly so that it's really hurt each other. It's really hard to land a real punch.
Yeah.
So Nick, I think fighting in hockey, if you get a player, as you're mentioning with this Ovechkin fight the other night, that actually gets a free hand and really
clocks a guy.
Clocks somebody, the possibility of doing damage is I think far higher in hockey fights than it is in a boxing ring for that reason alone.
Well,
bare knuckle fighting, man, it's not pretty.
Well, I will say this much, that within the rules of the sport and within the unwritten code between players, Ovechkin did nothing wrong. I mean, as soon as he connected, he was done, and he knew the guy was done fighting, he stopped. It's not like MMA and all these other things where, the whole goal is to get him down a pound away. He stopped. Now, it looks like when the kid hit his head on the ice, but remember, they're on skates, they're on the ice. You just, the momentum your body has within it, you just can't stop that in a heartbeat. So
that's true.
He did everything he could. As soon as the kid was on the ground, he skated away and went to the penalty box because he knew that's, obviously what was going to happen next. So this is why it was a bit of an aberration to see a blow like that landed. Usually these guys, they bust their knuckles up on your helmet more than they ever do hit you in the chin.
Right.
And that's the other mitigating factor. Most times they don't hurt each other. It's more of a wrestling match than anything.
Largely.
And they go till they're tired, and the refs step in and separate them. So,
but I do think that it's not just a question of interrupting the flow of the game. I don't think there's a place for fighting. Settle it within the confines of the rules of the game. And if you can't control it, you can't control your emotions in that. Well, what are you playing the game for in the first place? That really is my feeling about it, Nick. And as for enforcing the rules and enforcing, trying to protect the safety and the health of other players, especially star players, I think that's the job of the rules, and I think it's the job of referees and the league to make sure that kind of stuff doesn't happen. And the way you do that is, you just kick them out of the game. And I don't mean just kicking them out of the game for one night or 5 nights. I mean, a season-long ban. You're not playing hockey next year. And, that doesn't just hurt the guy's career. It hurts him where it really hurts, and that's in the pocketbook, right?
You also...
So that's... I just think it's a bit of a cop-out, okay? If you want to argue that it's part of the game, it's the tradition and that, I still would think that you should be banning fighting from hockey. But I think that actually is a better argument than trying to rationalize and saying, well, if we don't have that, how are we going to protect players in that? Well, I'll tell you, you play rugby, as I told you, it's a tough sport. It's a tough sport. But you throw an elbow, you're gone. You throw an elbow in rugby, you're gone. Throw a knee, gone. Used to be, back in the day, people used to stomp on accidentally, right? Today you stomp on somebody, accidentally or not, gone. It's your responsibility to ensure that you are looking out for the safety of your fellow players, and that includes your opponents. It's tough. Okay, you could tackle hard. Yes, there are injuries. But the rules are the rules. And as I said before, you throw a slap, or you throw a punch, or you grab a guy's hair, or in some cases you grab a guy's beard, or whatever, okay? Tackle around the neck, charge a guy down. In rugby, you have to put your arms around the guy and tackle him. You can go shoulder in first and give the guy a real wallop, but if you shoulder in first and don't wrap your arms around, okay, you're gone. You have to tackle players. That means you have to wrap your arms around.
So you have to finish your check.
Well, something like that. It's not like Canadian football or North American football where, you charge the guy at 50 miles an hour and just, turn your shoulder down and pop him out of bounds, right? Oh, no, you tackle the guy out of bounds, great. You could do that in rugby. You can't charge the guy out of bounds. You can't just knock players down. Anyway, that's my rant, Nick. What can I say? I think we're closer on this than, and to be honest with you, I don't want to sound like a saint. I go to the odd hockey game, and I don't look forward to fighting, but when a fight breaks out, I'm the kind of guy that ends up being that guy looking at the crash of the NASCAR race. I go, wow, look at these guys going at it now. Look at them going at it. I go with my wife. Look, there's a fight. My wife,
I know.
My wife still can't go over to the fact that we go to a hockey game and there's a fight. She goes, if I did that, I go, okay.
Yeah, but sweetheart, you didn't do that. You wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I don't really have a problem with two elite athletes going at it toe-to-toe in a hockey game because they're so well-conditioned and because most of the time they don't really hurt each other. So I'm going to take a little harder stand on it than you are.
Well, then just, why make it a penalty? Let them throw a few punches, break them up, let them go to the benches. That's
5 minutes in the box for fighting, yeah, to me, that's fine.
Yeah.
Because you really are hurting your team. That's where it matters. Because when you get back to the bench, you can explain to the coach what the fight was about.
Maybe, Nick. Maybe. What can I say?
I can say it's time for break.
We are definitely getting on towards that. We're coming up on the top of the hour.
Yeah.
Okay. Have we exhausted the fighting subject, Nick?
I think we beat that to death.
Okay. No pun intended.
Oh, yeah. Pun intended. Definitely pun intended.
Okay. Stay tuned, guys, for answering the call with Nick Vandergraat. And then we'll catch you on the other side of the break. Okay, welcome to hour number 2 of the Combat Zone. I am Joe. He is Nick. And this is the place, just to do it again, where the enemy has only one of 4 things to say: bail out, abandon ship, take cover, and we surrender. Nick's giving me... Hang on, I got to turn Nick's mic on.
That's cool.
That's cool. I'm a cool guy.
You are.
Just ask my kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
which is surprising. That means you're probably closer to adulthood.
Well, my son's going to be 33 years old this next week.
I have a daughter who will be 35, and we're waiting on her to give us our first grandson. We have 2 grandchildren right now, 2 girls, and this is number 3. So she can pop that cork anytime she wants to. Anyway, don't mean to.
Yeah, I don't know if I like that particular symbolism.
I'm sure she probably wouldn't like it much either.
All right. So we spent a full hour last week talking about climate change, and we've gotten onto this a few times. Yep. Nick, over the last, well, this is one of our favorite topics, of course, is the man-made climate change hoax, the man-made global warming hoax,
right,
etc. And we had a great guest on. If you didn't get a chance to catch Tom Harris on the show last week, don't forget that was episode 54. So just go back into our archive right there on the combatzone.ca or the combatzone.ca, the Combat Zone podcast page on thinkradio.ca, and download the podcast because it's really, really quite good. He's a very knowledgeable person, very articulate, and we're happy to have had him on the show. And he's been on with us for a few times now, and looking forward to having him on again. But Nick, I want to talk about what I think is the real environmental crisis in Canada, and it's not climate change, and it's not global warming, and it's not any of these things. To me, the real crisis in the environment in Canada is the raw sewage that is dumped into drinking water supplies or sources over and over and over again right across the country.
Oh, listen, this is in spite of the fact that the city of Ottawa is going to, the city of Ottawa, when I say they can't run a wheelbarrow, you'd be surprised how many people have no idea what I'm talking about. And then I have to explain to them, how many people does it take to run a wheelbarrow? And they say they don't even know what a wheelbarrow is. So anyway, the point is, they can't even run a wheelbarrow. So Sean Menard is a city councillor here in the city of Ottawa who wants the city to declare a climate emergency. Great. And his submission was 11 pages long, his motion. The first page was all the whereases, whereas the climate change is real, whereas this, whereas that, which is all nonsense. And they had a PhD. I have read some of the document to refute 90% of what he said. Anyway, the point is, that's not an emergency. But what you're talking about absolutely is. Now, there's a story, and I'll give it back, but there's a place called Iqaluit. Iqaluit. I keep calling it Iqaluit. Up on Frobisher Bay.
Better known as Frobisher Bay.
Yes. They're dumping 210,000 gallons of raw, untreated human feces and urine into the Arctic Ocean.
Into Frobisher Bay.
Right. Well, that's where Frobisher Bay is.
Frobisher Bay is an actual bay.
Yes.
Iqaluit is a town that used to be by the name of Frobisher Bay.
Right.
Situated, guess where?
In Frobisher Bay.
Right on Frobisher Bay.
Right.
Now, that's gallons, 950,000 liters a day. Now, in fairness, that's not the norm for them. They've had some equipment problems that is causing this. But the point I want to make is that, we're talking right now about Iqaluit, but this is something that's going on across the country in municipality after municipality after municipality. Not most, but enough that it's really, in my view, maybe it's not a crisis per se in most of the big cities, but you go across the country and count the number of communities, small communities, particularly Aboriginal communities, where they're not allowed to use their water supply without boiling the water,
right?
Because the water has become contaminated, and it's not contaminated with mercury. That's a separate issue. I know there are places where there are problems with mercury contamination. It's not a chemical contamination. It's a bacterial and viral contamination coming from largely from poor treatment of sewage. Now, we've talked about this before, Nick. Let's just set aside for a second whether or not climate change is real. And I'm one of those people that is saying, well, I can accept that climate change is real. Let's set aside for a second the question of whether or not climate change is caused by human activity,
right?
Which I disagree with. I don't think there's any evidence to support the theory that climate change is caused by human activity. But surely to goodness, it makes more sense to provide funding and to provide resources to give communities across this country. I mean, this is Canada, for pity's sake. We are one of the richest countries in the world. It's criminal that we would spend $1 on climate change, $1 subsidizing electric cars for wealthy people, $1 subsidizing switching from or installing solar panels, and or $1, 1 penny. Well, we don't have pennies anymore.
That's right.
But you know what I'm saying? When we aren't able to ensure that all Canadians have access to clean land, clean water, and clean air. So if you want to spend money dealing with the environment, these are the things that you have to deal with. You have to deal with an Iqaluit that's dumping almost 1 million liters every single day of raw sewage into Frobisher Bay in the Arctic. You have to deal with the raw sewage that's being dumped on a regular basis right here in Ottawa, from Ottawa into the Ottawa River.
Well, I'm looking at a map provided by the Quebec Ministry of the Environment. It shows 100, just in the province of Quebec, 100 municipalities that are doing exactly that. They're dumping raw sewage into the watercourses of which people draw their drinking water. Now, look, that's an emergency because it's not happening just on reserves. Okay, that's bad enough it's happening on reserves. But on top of that, you now have the city of Ottawa does it. Every time we get a significant rainfall, water pours, untreated city water, sewage pours into the Ottawa River.
Right. Now, in fairness to Ottawa, that's not an official policy. That's because there are problems with the system and engineering
but
problems.
If you're going to call something an emergency...
Well, that's my point. My point is if you want, it's an emergency, and if you want to spend money, that's where you have to spend the money, right there.
That's right. As a matter of fact, I have a friend of mine who has been an engineer for over 50 years now, who has a system in place that's functioning as we speak, that it's in Westport, Ontario. Now, if you go to Westport, you will see their wastewater treatment system is a land application system, and it used to flow into the Lake Westport or Westport Lake. And they had algae blooms. The lake was basically dying because the oxygen, the contamination by the municipal water sewage treatment plant pouring it into the lake had pretty much killed the lake. So along comes this engineer and his small little company, and they come in there and they set up a system that takes the sewage and doesn't dump it in the lake. It puts it in a couple of settling ponds and then sprays it out over the land where it gets a chance to soak into the ground. They even put up a berm to make sure that nothing trickled into the lake. And within a few years, the lake had come back, and now there's a commercial fishery in the lake. They saved that lake. So if he can do it there, In other words, my point is there's ways to do this. You don't have to use the rivers. And you know why they do it? Because it's lazy. They've been doing it this way since we walked out of the caves or got kicked out of the garden. Pick your analogy, okay? Whenever there was garbage to get rid of, you just threw it in the river, and the river would carry it away, and everything was fine. Well, when there was only 1 million people on the planet, you could get away with that. But there's 7 billion of us now. You can't do that anymore. And so you now have, all across the country, this situation with raw sewage pouring in the millions of gallons on a daily basis across this country. Never mind any place else. This is why I get so upset with environmental sky is falling crowd who, they want us to make all these major changes to our lifestyle for nothing. And yet we have real issues right here, right in front of us that you and I are now talking about that need to be dealt with. Here's another one. Why do we still bury our garbage? When somebody throws out a CFL light bulb, the little squirrely, piggly-tailed ones, they have mercuric oxide in them. Now, one light bulb is not going to make any difference. But 50% of the ones that are disposed of are not disposed as hazardous waste the way they're supposed to be. Because of the mercuric oxide within them, they get thrown in the landfill. So you start adding up the light bulbs and thinking about how much mercury that eventually becomes, and all of a sudden you have a real threat to your water supply, your water table. Because, yes, a lot of landfills are now lined with a clay liner. What happens if they leak? There's no guarantees. So why are we still using landfills? Why are we not using high efficiency incineration?
And here's an even better question. And by the way, if you want to join in the conversation, guys, you can call anywhere from North America, 844-415-2115, 844-415-2115. And Nick, I'm going to call out some of our environmental friends. The people who complain, who purport to be concerned about the environment and concerned about their fellow human beings, etc. This whole idea of banning plastic straws in restaurants,
oh brother,
in order to save whales and turtles, etc. Okay, even if it was a sensible policy that we're not going to use straws in restaurants, because we want to save the whales. How about saving the children in communities that don't have safe drinking water? It's so hypocritical that environmentalists would care so much about turtles, but nobody cares about the children who are constantly having to live under these boil water advisories. I think it's borderline criminal.
Well, it's a set of disordered priorities when you care more about whales than you do about your own kind. I mean, it's just plain, you're right. I remember there's a very funny video, if you've never seen it, called The Chicken Lady, where this young lady walks in and she starts talking about her friend Snowball. And she's trying to get people to stop eating chicken because it's not food, it's friends or something like that. It's absolutely nonsensical. I'd never thought to pull that up, but you should see it. This woman is out of her mind. Anyway, but this is the kind of hysterics you get into. And I don't know this for a fact, but my guess is that she wouldn't care about the little kids up in Iqaluit or in Grassy Narrows or in any of these French communities or any community that has to drink from the river that somebody just flushed their toilet into. I'm sorry. You know what? If you're going to care about something and be passionate about it, fine. I admire that. But make it something worthwhile. This is worthwhile. Fixing this is worthwhile. Why is Quebec getting away with this?
Not just Quebec. Let's be fair.
I'm looking at a map of Quebec. Why is anybody getting away with this?
Well, why is the city of Ottawa getting away with debating a motion to declare a climate change emergency when they still haven't tackled the raw sewage problem. I don't understand how it is that people are not up in arms about this.
Well, they've forgotten about it. This is part of the reason why shows like this exist, is to keep this stuff in people's minds. What the solution to this problem was about raw sewage? They decided they were going to build 2 massive underground tanks, and they're still excavating the holes. I mean, it's a major contract in the city of Ottawa that employs multiple large earth-moving shovels, heavy dump trucks every single day. And they're making this. But you know what? It doesn't matter how big the hole is, because sooner or later it's going to be full. Think about this. If we get 2 inches of rain, now there's a formula. You can figure this out. How many gallons of water that represents over an acre of land. Now multiply that by how many acres the city of Ottawa covers. All out, it doesn't take long to fill even the biggest hole in the ground. Then what? Especially if you have another rainfall like last year or the year before, when we had a constant rain in the springtime. What happens when they're full? You have to end up doing exactly what these things are designed to prevent you from doing, is dumping them in the river. It just drives me crazy when people don't stop and think this stuff through. Doesn't matter how big the bucket is, sooner or later it's full, and then what? Especially if you need it to hold more water. You got to dump it in the river. So you're not accomplishing anything. It's a make-work project.
Well, I don't know. It's pretty hypocritical, Nick.
Yeah, and this is, this
really
is why
the only word I could think of in this case.
This is why I could just take Mr. Menard by the lapels and shake him and say, listen, wake up. Pay attention to what matters. You're all worried about how we might fry 80 years from now. Oh, I'm sorry, now the world's going to end in 11 years. Well, what do you think the chances of that being real are? Slim to none, because they've made that prediction about 5 or 10 times now, and it's never happened yet. Every time somebody predicts the end of the world, they get it wrong. So, anyway, you want to talk about a rant, man. You just get me cranked up on that stuff and let me go, and I'll be like the ever-ready bunny bouncing around here. Or you remember the little wind-up chimp with the clanging cymbals? That's me.
It was the chimpanzee that was
with the
doing
cymbals. Ting, ching, 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 ching. That's me.
Yeah. What? I'm trying to think of, can you see that anymore? What is that?
I don't know. I can't remember what commercial it was.
It's unbelievable.
But anyway, it just shows you how weird my mind works. But, yeah.
Okay.
And that's going straight into
I'm not really sure if that's Iqaluit or Ottawa. They dump raw sewage into... Hey, all you lefties out there on the left coast, okay? Do you know that they dump raw sewage into the Juan de Fuca Strait?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I cannot believe you tolerate that. Why are you not protesting in the streets?
Why aren't they out there in their plastic kayaks?
Well, they probably don't want to get contaminated.
That didn't slow them down when they went after those tankers.
Mm-hmm.
So how much sewage did they have to paddle through to get up to those tankers?
I know.
Okay, that's Iqaluit.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Oh, you're having too much fun, Nick. That is the City of Ottawa environmental policy should be.
You know what?
Except you might be, you might be blocking your pipes. So shred. Now, well, of course, I was going to say shred it, but then what are you going to do with the paper? Off to the landfill. It makes me pine for the days when we just take the garbage out to the burning barrel.
Oh man, I have threatened that several times. But you know something?
But you could do it. Can't you do it? With somebody, or would one of your neighbors call the environmental people? whatever the environment.
Theoretically, that's real. But believe me, I know my neighbors, and they probably have a burn barrel too. Anyway,
so you're not allowed. You're not allowed to burn out where you are.
Oh yeah.
Are you allowed to, or do you have to have a permit for that?
You're supposed to have a permit.
We are the government. You will be assimilated. Resistance is futile.
Well, excuse me. I'm going to put up some resistance, and I will do everything I can not to be assimilated. But here's what the environment policy for any municipality should be, no matter where you are: clean air, water, and soil.
Clean air, clean water, clean land.
That's it.
Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives, please listen to what we're telling you.
Clean air, clean water, clean land.
That's it.
That's all you need to worry about.
That should be the Conservative Party's environmental policy.
So
because
the next time...
It's easy to communicate, easy to remember, it rolls off your tongue, and it's the right thing to do.
No kidding. So if you're living in Memphis, Tennessee, or you're out there in Scottsdale, Arizona, or in Nome, Alaska, or Frobisher Bay, that's the thing you want for an environmental policy. Because, first of all, it's, as Joseph just pointed out, it's very simple, and it means you can be held accountable. This is the other thing about this whole climate nonsense. They've already, today, there was a story about how our targets have been pushed back because of forest fires and the long, cold winter making us burn more fossil fuel to stay warm. So the climate Barbie was out today saying that, now we don't know if we can hit our targets. Well, the targets were never achievable in the first place. We knew you couldn't hit the targets. So what are you talking about? This is another person who should just please sit down and stop talking. Just sit down and stop talking, which is much nicer than saying, sit down and shut up. I don't want to say that, so sit down and stop talking. But those three things are the common sense kind of approach to environmentalism that I really like, because you can set benchmarks, you can watch for success, and if it's not working, you can figure out why, fix it, and actually go out and make those things happen. But you can't do that when you're dealing with something as nebulous as man-made global warming, because there's too many uncontrollable factors in it. See, this is one of those pregnant pause now where you're supposed to fill in.
No, a good interviewer lets the pause hang. Doesn't fill in the dead air. You know that, Nick. You're a good interviewer.
Yes, but I didn't know I was being interviewed.
No, you're not.
Okay.
Clean air, clean land, clean water. Yep, that's the answer, guys. That's what we should be spending money on. And if you're a resident of the city of Ottawa, you should be taking up your phone, pick up your phone tomorrow and calling your city councillor and say, look, enough with this silliness about, crisis, climate change crisis, emergency or whatever. Set that, tell your city councillor you want them to set that aside and you want them to deal with the raw sewage problem. That's an immediate problem. It affects the health of people in our community, and that's what we should be dealing with, particularly because there was money that was already allocated by different levels of government to solve this problem. So the only thing that's missing here is the political will on the part of City Council in Ottawa, particularly the mayor, to deal with this. And, if you're not a resident of Ottawa, look into the policy of what goes on in your own community, because, as you pointed out, Nick, this is not a rare thing in this country. It happens in many, many, many places, including, we were talking about Longueuil beforehand, just outside of Montreal. It's a suburb of Montreal.
I get the story right here.
It's not, we're not talking about just about Aboriginal communities in northern Saskatchewan. We're talking about major North American metropolises where they're not ensuring that their raw sewage is treated properly.
Well, they dumped raw sewage for 8 days, 8 straight days into the St. Lawrence River.
Yeah, it's not excusable, especially if you really care about the environment. So, at the risk of sounding, too repetitious, right? Clean air, clean land, clean water. Not necessarily in that order. That's what we want. Nick, time for a break.
It is.
We shall see you guys
In a few
on the
minutes.
other side.
That's right.
Right here in the Combat Zone on Think Radio.
Okay, welcome back to the Combat Zone, folks. He's Joseph, I'm Nick, and the enemy has retreated. We're just waiting for the surrender. This week we saw something happen I've never seen in my lifetime, and to tell you the truth, nobody living has seen, and I don't think anyone has ever seen. That was the fire at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, France. And there's several striking things about this fire that I think are worth pointing out. First of all, the building itself the construction began in 1163. I have it here somewhere. Where did it go? Here it is. Okay. The construction began in 1163 under, there we are, under King Louis VII, and was completed in 1345. So how long is it? Almost 300 years?
Almost 200 years.
Almost 200 years to build this building.
Yeah.
Now, granted, they didn't have...
182, I think it works.
Okay, but think about it. They didn't have... And this thing is built of massive blocks of granite. And, you know... The two towers that house the bells... these things are huge. They did not have hydraulics. They did not have massive cranes like we have today.
Well,
so,
what strikes me, Nick, isn't just the relative difficulty. I mean, it's not like they didn't have tools, but they certainly didn't have the machinery that we have
that's what I was
today.
referring to, yeah.
So, you know, everything was done really with the proverbial elbow grease. But what I find the most striking about this type of construction is how long it took to complete. Now, remember, people were not living and working into their 60s and 70s. You know, an artisan, a stonemason, might learn his trade in his early teens and might be working as a fully qualified mason. Ooh, who knows, 16, 17, 18 years old maybe. And they might give you a good 20, 25 years. And then, you know, they retire and die. So it was a brutal time to live, as most of human history has been. We live in an incredibly blessed time today. So when you talk about close to 200 years, you're talking about not just multi-generational, but you're talking about 4, 5, 6, 7 generations of people actually working on this. That the people who started it, obviously, were never able to complete the project.
They knew this was a project they would never see the end
right.
of.
And there were people who were born, raised, and began working on this project somewhere in the middle of it, who didn't see its completion. And if you think that, you know, you have parents, fathers handing down their trade to their son, to the next generation, you know, you have great-great-great-grandparents who are working on this same project. So, you know, there's a certain amount of admiration, I think, that you have to have for the people who built this kind of structure. You know, a good friend of mine was pointing out to me today that the news kept on referring to it as a monument to human imagination. And I'm going, no, and as he said, I don't remember exact words, but it wasn't a monument to human imagination. It's a monument to faith in our Creator, to faith in God. That's what these people, whether it's a Catholic church, but whether you're Catholic or not, whether you're even Christian or not, you have to pause and admire and respect the determination and the dedication of the people who built this with their own hands.
Well, the thing about that, and you can see it in, I won't put it in the same context, but look at right here in the nation's capital. You've got St. Patrick's Basilica. You've got our version of Notre Dame behind, almost on the river. And these buildings they are in and of themselves magnificent. And when you think about the people who built them, because without getting too religious at the moment, but these buildings are more than buildings because they are, if you're a stonemason, let's go back to the chapel, the Notre Dame Cathedral in France. If you're a stonemason, you can't play an 8500 pipe organ, okay? You can't sing in the choir because you probably can't sing. You're not a priest. You can't offer mass. You're not, maybe you could be an altar boy. But the way that you can pray, the skill of your hands that God has given you, is how you express your thankfulness for this skill, and you give it back by building this magnificent building to the very best that you're humanly capable of doing. The building itself is a standing prayer that has lasted for almost 850 years. Now, there was something about this I wanted to mention as well. They still haven't even talked about how I'm just beginning to see in the news today, what started the fire. They're talking about roof construction and might have been the source of the fire. I don't know. I'm going to leave all that speculation aside. But when they first walked in after the fire, there was still smoke, the smell of smoke, and the president of France and a UK reporter from the Daily News walked in with him, and they took some pictures and things like that. And when you look down the main body of the building, this is a huge building, at the very front, at the high altar, there's a huge gold cross that was at the seat of the fire, and it stands there untouched. How does a gold cross, plated or not, whether it was solid gold or whether it was just plated gold, how does that happen? I'm not trying to say there's anything miraculous, but it does make you stop and think. You've got this bright splash of gold at the end in the cross, and at the foot of that cross, you see the Virgin Mary holding the body of Christ after the crucifixion. Now, that never took place, but it's just what's the word I'm looking for? It's a representation. Okay, so they're not trying to say this took place. They're trying to say this represents the agony of the church at that time, or this, the culmination. Anyway, and it is Notre Dame Cathedral. But to compare this building to others around, because this isn't the only unbelievable building like this in France. There's, I think it was you who was pointing out, there's like 10 or 11 other ones. There's the one at Reims. There's Lourdes. There's the one at where the kings and queens are crowned and buried. Not all at the same time, but in France, it's history. You never know.
Well, historically, Notre Dame, as important as it was not the most important cathedral in France. But you're right. There's in terms of architectural beauty, and just the sheer dedication of the workforces. And, you see this in different places in Europe as well. It's not just in France, and it's not just religious institutions, Christian churches, but it largely, I think that the preponderance of buildings are of this age and of this detail and of this magnitude are churches. Yeah. Predominantly, for many historical reasons, Catholic churches, Roman Catholic churches. So it's quite. And I had been to Notre Dame a couple of times as a tourist, obviously, just going in, and regrettably, even though Notre Dame and churches like Notre Dame are still used as churches. I think it's regrettable that they have become such tourist attractions also. I think that they've lost their primacy as religious institutions or places of worship. They're still places of worship, but in terms of the interest that people have in them, people have been going mostly because they're just interested as tourists in the architecture or the age, or it's just one of those places. But it was a magnificent structure, magnificent building, and there are many of these buildings, and they are. I mean, magnificent is really the awe-inspiring. These are the only kinds of words that come to my mind when you think about it. Today where we live in an age of instant everything,
right?
And if we can't, if you can't have it now, it's not worth setting aside and sacrificing for. And I think it's a learning moment, if you will, where people can actually sort of hit the pause button in their lives and really just think carefully. Just think about what really the time and the dedication and the patience that went into these things that, gosh, almost 200 years, Nick, to build one structure. It's amazing. But I'll let you finish, and then I want to shift gears a little bit because there are a few things I think we should talk about around this fire.
Okay. Well, the only other comment I was going to make is the only other building I can think of that would be on par with Notre Dame and the other cathedrals like it would be the Sistine Chapel in Rome.
Right.
I mean, let's face it, this kind of architecture, first of all, is very durable, has lasted, like in the case of the Sistine Chapel, that was built in the 1400s. So it's several hundred years younger than is the chapel in the Notre Dame Cathedral. But
still quite old.
It is. I
mean, when you're in Canada, tell me what buildings come even close to this.
Nothing. We don't have anything.
Of course not.
And part of that is geographical, But at the same time, you're quite right about the idea that instant gratification. Like if in the construction industry, of which I am now a part, if we had to plan for a project of that magnitude, it's just. I don't know any contractor who could say, yes, let's do this. It would take an enormous amount of resources. I mean, it would. I can't even get my head around. Like, it took a monarch to get this started, and he didn't even see the end of it.
So, nor did his son,
or his son.
Yeah, it's just amazing. That's
it is.
Really all I could say. What are the curiosities about this whole affair, though? Setting apart, the history of Notre Dame and the loss on its own merit, that I found I was very curious to hear immediately that the fire started. That the authorities immediately were ruling out arson or perhaps even terrorism, and I'm not. Don't want to be a conspiracy theorist. I don't want people to think that I'm saying that it was possibly arson or anything like that. But I think it's worth noting that the authorities did immediately say, this isn't arson, probably a construction accident or whatever. And then today or late yesterday, I was hearing that it could take several weeks before they determine the cause of the fire. Now, am I the only person that found some incongruity in those particular statements? I think I'm not suggesting that there was any terrorism here. I'm not suggesting that there was any arson, but I think that it was wrong for the authorities to rush to the microphones and rule things out before they had even the minimum chance to conduct, a minimum investigation. And it seemed to me that they were breathless tripping over themselves to tell people that it wasn't an attack on the church as a church, that it wasn't an attack, and it didn't even have to be, Islamic terrorism or anything like that. It could have just been, some militant secularists, because this has been a problem that's been not well reported, in fact, not reported at all, and that has been the wave of vandalism and attacks against Christian institutions and churches across Europe in recent years. And so it shouldn't surprise anyone if, in fact, it turns out that this was arson. So I'm trying to wrap my mind around why the authorities felt that it was so necessary to get out there right away and to say this wasn't arson, because now they've boxed themselves into a corner. What happens if they conduct a thorough investigation
and find out it was
a week from now or 2 weeks from now that, in fact, there was arson involved here?
I think part of the reason, first of all, I agree with you. I think the best thing they could have done was walk to the microphone and said, "Look, we have no idea. We'll follow every lead, and when we know more about what it..."
Which ironically is what they're saying today.
Yeah, well, they should have said that right off the bat.
We have no idea. It's not arson. We just don't have any idea what it was.
But just drop the whole "it's not arson" thing, because you don't know yet.
Right.
Maybe it is arson. Maybe it was a terrorist. I don't want to believe that. I want to believe it was an accident. But what I want doesn't always square with what goes on, because you're right. There's several different websites and blogs out there that reports on this stuff, and this is not the first time a church has been attacked within France. There was one case where there was an attack on the if you've ever been to a Catholic church, you'll find these little fonts at the entrances where people walk in and they bless themselves by dip their fingers in the holy water. Right. And somebody poisoned the water, and people were getting sick. And the police said, "Oh, well, we don't know anything about that." So they had to scrub clean and they have to take extra security measures now. This is just one small example. Now, I can't say this enough. I don't want this to be the case. But you know what? Let the investigation go where it may.
Right.
And if it is the case, here's why I think they jumped on this so fast to say no. Because if it turned out that this is actually a case of arson or a terrorist attack of some kind, the French population would explode. It's not the first time they've done that, where they've gone, taken to the streets. Look at the yellow vest last year. This strikes at the very core of what it means to be French. Now, France is not exactly the most religious country on the planet anymore. As a matter of fact, it's one of the most secular in Europe at the moment. But the Catholicism and French are so tightly interwoven over the last several centuries that even if they're not conscious of it, it's part of the subconscious makeup. And if you strike that, you have just awakened a sleeping giant. And I think the French government knew it, and I think that they are doing everything they can to avoid that. And that's why they said it's not arson. That's just my opinion. But looking at the things that make sense, because I'm telling you that they would not take that lying down. They just wouldn't.
I think I'm a little more circumspect than you are, Nick, about the possibility that French people will rise up in righteous indignation if it turns out that there was an act of terrorism committed against Notre Dame Cathedral. They might, but something tells me that they wouldn't. But then again, it could be surprised. Religion is a funny thing, and when you say that France is the most secular country in Europe, that may be true, but it's not true universally. And when I say that, it sounds kind of a weird way of putting it, or phrasing it, but I guess what I would say is that, if you're talking in the big urban centers, then that's true. But once you get out of the urban centers into smaller towns and villages where so many of the population live, not the majority anymore, but people still live there, they're still very close to their religion, and they're still very close to their community churches, etc. Even here in Canada, in Quebec, people like to talk about Quebec being a very secular society, and it is, but it's important to remember that that societies with large populations are not these monoliths where everybody sort of, thinks the same way and acts the same way and reacts the same way. And even in a place like Quebec, which is predominantly secular, once you get outside of the big metropolitan areas, primarily Montreal, then people are far more still more in touch with their churches and with their religion than people really appreciate. And to sort of put the icing on the cake here,
Right.
Even if they're not that closely tied to their churches and to their religion, which would be, again, predominantly Roman Catholicism, they're actually very socially conservative. And so you can, if you're running an election campaign and you want to win votes in Quebec, you ignore socially conservative, traditional family values. You ignore these things at your peril.
Well,
a little counterintuitive. You don't hear that every day, but it's true.
But let's not forget that what this is. When I say they would not take this lying down, it's because I would think it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. And the French are very tolerant people, but their tolerance is not infinite. And they've had some real issues in several different quarters. That everything from the carbon tax that Marcon tried to bring in last year to problems with immigration. Just look at the city of Calais and the struggles they've had over the last 4 or 5 years. And all of this builds up and builds up and builds up. And then something like this happens to one of their great landmarks, because in Paris, Notre Dame is more famous than the Eiffel Tower. If you go see anything, if you had to pick between the two, you're going to go see Notre Dame, because Eiffel Tower is just a steel tower.
And I can vouch for that because, I spent a lot of time in France, not in Paris itself, but just outside of Paris, studying. And when I would go into the city, I was not a very touristy person, so I didn't do any of the tourist stuff. Later on, when I returned and visited, I did, the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre and a few of the other museums and that. But when I was actually there, I was not going to. But I did Notre Dame. I did Notre Dame twice.
Yeah.
So I can attest to that. Absolutely.
Yeah. People, if you got to choose between the two, because what is the Eiffel Tower's history compared to Notre Dame? Nothing. It's a blip on the radar by comparison.
Nick, we're coming close to the end of the show, and I think I want to take a minute or two just to, if it's okay with you, I'd like to give a plug to Mike Patton and his new show that we're carrying
absolutely.
at Think Radio these days, the Irate Payers podcast. Is it Irate Payers podcast or Irate WC? Now I'm feeling bad because I totally didn't have the right name, right? So it's Irate Payers podcast.
I'm looking at it right now. Irate Payers podcast.
And Mike's been involved in all kinds of politics and political campaigns. He's a real veteran when it comes to this and communications and media relations. But this is a project that he started, and it's really municipal politics focused, particularly Ottawa. But even though he's focusing on Ottawa, there are a lot of issues that really sort of transcend location. And that will ring a bell. People will really appreciate, even if they're not from Ottawa. But I want to give a shout out to Mike and encourage people to check out on the website Irate Payers podcast. There's only a couple of episodes up right now, but Mike's a great guy, and if you want to really stay in touch with what's going on at City Hall here in Ottawa,
that's the way to do it.
That's the way to do it. So again, it's Irate. Just click, if you're on thinkradio.ca, click on shows and podcasts, and select Irate Payers podcast.
He is the latest member of the Think Radio
Network.
Network. That's the word I was looking for.
That was the word you were looking for.
Yes, it was.
Think Radio Network. And once again, my friend, we are coming to the end of a Wednesday night show, Nick.
Yeah, they sure go by in a hurry, don't they?
They do. I don't know what else to say.
Well, this time next week, Boston will be out of the playoffs. The Leafs be into round 2.
Yeah, you hope.
Well, of course.
You hope.
No, well, there's no hope. I mean, how did Yoda put it? You either do or you do not. There is no try.
Okay. And with those words of wisdom from Yoda,
That's right.
we will see you all next week here in the Combat Zone.
Have a good night, folks.